Western civilization is moving closer to a point of irreconcilable, unstable equilibrium, as frighteningly increasing numbers of people trust nothing. Media, academia, and especially the governments are no longer held in high esteem. Regaining trust is often impossible after betrayal. However, transparency is essential to any healing process, and that is the essence of the Don Sullivan Show. Please listen to the team explore, probe, and debate cutting-edge science, technology, and computing. Play ball! Hello, everyone. Hello, listening audience to the Don Sullivan Show. Here we are with another episode. And having everybody really understand and accept and for the perspective of our proof that the Don Sullivan Show is science, technology, and computing that is discussed on a teenage level. Today, we're going to go well away from our normal discussions and that are more often than not focused and fixated almost on computing to a whole different area of science. And this area of science is public health. And we're going to have a lot of discussions over the years with a number of different experts in a very broad subsection of public health. And one of the areas I think that gets virtually no focus, and I truly hope our soon-to-be new Health and Human Services Secretary, Bobby Kennedy Jr., has a plan for, is public health from a fitness perspective in secondary and primary education. I had the privilege in a different lifetime earlier in the 80s and 90s. You all know that I was a distance runner of some note, but I had the privilege of coaching, being an assistant coach to our guest today, Coach Ron Sparagoski. And he is truly one of the best minds I have ever worked with in regards to both track and field. We'll actually have him on in a separate discussion about jumping later on in sometime in the future. But what we really want to discuss here is the general notions of the collapse of public health from a secondary and primary scholastic perspective. And it really has been a collapse. Ron and I noticed this in the 80s that it was happening. And I think we can all agree, I hope everybody can agree, that we are certainly seeing this throughout the general youth of America and all of Western civilization. Ron is a true physical educator. So, the cliche of the gym teacher, Ron is not. Ron is an expert in physical education, both in the perspective of the general class of all students in the many high schools he has worked in and taught in, as well as being a coach. Ron can talk about any sport there is, but most significantly track and field. And we're going to talk about public general physical education and what has happened to it. Say hello, Ron. And did I introduce you properly? And we'll get to Steve in a minute here. Go ahead.
Much appreciated.
Much appreciated.
Thank
Anything
you for the introduction. No.
So
Probably went overboard.
I don't think so. I told you he's too damn humble. We're all from New Jersey, and now let me allow Stephen. I've digressed in that, and I've taken the first 3 minutes here and not allowed Jersey Steve to introduce himself. So again, the enigmatic, am I pronouncing that correctly? Mr.
So.
Jersey Steve, introduce yourself while I fumble with my words.
Hey, everyone. It's Ron. It's great to have you on board. And I'm looking forward to this discussion. I know health and fitness has probably been more of a focal point lately, even in politics. And I used to love gym class in primary and secondary school. It was fun.
Okay, so Ron is going to be mad at you right away for calling it gym class. It is physical education. And that's what Ron's academic work is in. And Ron, I'm going to let you slap Stephen around to start with. Explain to him why he was wrong calling it gym class.
A gym is a room.
It's a room, but what are you doing it? And why is it physical education and not gym class?
Well, you're trying to educate people, get them to try things, challenge them. understand. And the great thing about physical education, if you're doing a lesson, the kids get instant feedback. Okay, so we're working on a how to do a forward roll. Huh? They're going to know whether or not they did it properly as soon as they finish executing it.
What about
So
kids now? Can they do forward rolls?
that's a
I
good
think
question.
they do stuff like that on TikTok, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, but if TikTok's not there, they're not going to do it. And they're going to, what we're going to talk about sort of a bifurcation in physical education here in a minute. But Ron, I'm going to start off with sort of this diatribe that, and I think it really occurred after World War II. The boomers, blame the boomers, right? I guess we're both boomers technically, but blaming them. After World War II, the youth of America were in great shape, right? They had just defeated the entire world, and especially those who survived were in great overall physical condition. They came home, had babies, and that became the boomer generation. But the boomers then had babies, and things changed, didn't they? The focus on physical education in primary and secondary schools diminished precipitously. Why? I can't think of anything more important. Why do you think that was? And we know it all happened, but why?
I would say students, backed by their parents, thought it was too difficult, and they didn't see a need for it.
Well, what possibly could be of greater need than the actual physical fitness? We used to have things in the 60s and 70s, and we'll talk about this a little bit more later, but the Presidential Fitness Award, in which it was kind of silly, but
that was my
kids,
era.
Yeah, it was your era, mine too. I mean, they did things that were kind of silly. How many push-ups could you do? How many sit-ups could you do? Anything could you do? Could you actually jog more than the length of the basketball court without passing out? And obviously, we're gonna have a lot of discussions on the Don Sullivan Show about this as we go along. But the level of fitness that most of the generation has in terms of what they eat, the processed food, and so on. I just had a visit with my doctor who lectured me for about an hour on the fact that the breakfast foods that I eat are as bad as if I go to a drive-through restaurant.
Well, let's talk about it. What are you having for breakfast?
Yeah. What am I having for breakfast? I eat these little bowls with eggs and sausage and all in them, and he told me to stop doing that because it's killing me. I'm not sure I buy it too much.
Are you making the bowls, or are you buying them from a store?
To the extent that I press 3 minutes on the microwave, I am absolutely the chef.
That's your problem. Processed foods. That's
all right. So before we get too silly here, Ron, what do you really think it happened? What happened in terms of the politics, in terms of the attitudes of the boomer parents, that they allowed their kids to become such physical wrecks through the 80s and 90s and then beyond?
I would say because they would probably in their minds describe it as a very difficult, uncomfortable situation, being challenged, just the idea of organization following rules. I mean, in my era, I graduated in 1969. We'd have 90 kids in the gym with 2 teachers, and the only way you're going to control that is if you're brought up at home and you go to school and now you're in charge. You're under the care of adults, and whatever they say goes. They're your parents at that point.
More respect for
that's
authority.
That's what I think eroded. Excuse me?
And so
the respect for authority, you think that kind of eroded a bit?
I think that hurt a lot, yes.
But even let's reverse that. How about the willingness or the desire when you had multi-parent households or 2-parent households even, or 1-parent households, that everybody was working to just simply keep the kids doing whatever they wanted to, handing them, as we get into the 60s and 70s, video games and then computers and then cell phones and so on, and they are doing nothing else. I'm not going to be advocating for not wearing a helmet when you're riding on a bicycle, but I cannot remember a time in the 70s where I was actually inside during the summer, not doing a lot of physical activity, whether it was basketball, baseball, football, and obviously with us, the ultimate track and field and so on, but everything. And I wasn't an anomaly. This was everybody. And that doesn't happen now, does it?
Physical activities, right?
Well, that's right. And
you have a choice. You got kicked out of the house in the summer, and go play with your friends.
Well, there was when I was growing up, it was great because I think myself, I know, just speaking for myself, it wasn't just physical. I mean, it was, you were involved in anything. Like, okay, if a room had to be painted in the house, or I mean, my feeling is anything you learn is beneficial. If you can nail two pieces of wood together, paint a room, and these were all kinds of things we were exposed to. And I think that just carried over. So when you got into a structured physical education program, you took it as a challenge, as an opportunity to challenge yourself, test yourself, or I could figure out a way to get this done because you've already experienced other.
You had confidence as well. Confidence in your own body, for one thing. And so many existing kids just don't have that now. By kids, I mean all of our audience, because, of course, the Don Sullivan Show, we focus on speaking of these scientific principles on a teenage level. Let me step back for a minute, though, and I want to ask you, where would you categorize physical education? Would you categorize it as academic or as sports?
Yeah, that's a good question.
I mean, it can
sports to me means the competition gets hyped up. Phys ed, I don't know if you have to reach that level of,
I don't think you do, and it's sort of a set-up question.
You're competing more against yourself in a sense. Whereas the sport, things are more structured, or just lack of participation. You get kids who go to practice all week for football and don't get to play 1 minute on Saturday or Friday, whatever they play on these days. So that's, I would say, so academic. I would put phys ed into an academic area.
And I don't think most of the physical education teachers, the people we sort of derisively refer to as gym teachers, would agree, because anytime, certainly since the middle 90s when we were coaching together, I have had the occasion to actually walk into a physical education class. It basically goes like this. Here's a whole bunch of kids in there. Throw out a couple of basketballs or a couple of footballs or whatever and say, go play and let us hang out here and watch and make sure nobody gets killed. Yes. And there's not a lot more to it than that. There's not the education on how to properly do a push-up. I have a 5-year-old grandkid that I am very focused on in terms of watching him develop as an athlete. And he's certainly got lots and lots of skills. And he's involved in a lot of different sports. Jiu-jitsu, for example, those things that I really love, those activities that are so focused on proprioceptism, a word you taught me, by the way, 40 years ago.
Body
learn
awareness.
While doing. And I am trying to teach him how to do a push-up. Now, I'm 62 years old, and according to my doctor, I'm about to die if I don't get some blood tests work better. But I can sit and do 25 push-ups like a Marine, pretty much not any more than that, but I can do them literally perfectly. And this 5-year-old has not even been suggested to him yet on how to actually do something along those lines. Now he is listening to me.
Push-ups, that
he doesn't know.
The
he
head
doesn't get it.
bobbers.
Yeah, so I'll be on the floor doing a push-up, and he'll be having fun trying to crawl underneath me, and the dog is licking my face, but I can still do them, right? So it's really interesting, and he's very capable, and this is what I wonder about. Why isn't it that a lot of these basic physical activities that you will learn in dancing, in ice skating, in swimming, and I know a lot of these kids, especially the kids that have a lot of money, or come from parents that are affluent, they all take these lessons, but they're not really learning the basic fundamental activities before they actually try to go in and do something that's a sport that to a large extent is nothing more than the parents viscerally living their lives through them. Right? You see that?
It does seem like the affluent kids are probably better off, though. I think if you look at the data around childhood obesity, I think it's close to 20% right now, which is incredibly high.
Either that or they're in a gang in an inner city, and of course they get lots of physical activity there.
Yeah,
and
right.
I don't mean to be terribly derisive, but what I just said is provably true. So
yeah. But I think in general, the like obesity, there does appear to be more lower level income obesity. If you compared those two demographics, there's more of that.
If you're extremely poor, or in America, extremely poor often means being obese as well. But if you're in an area in which you have virtually no assistance and resources, and you're involved probably with things you shouldn't be, or if you're in a school in which you are really escaping through sports, that will work. Or if you have an affluence to be able to have your children all the way up through the high school level participate constantly as long as they're willing to, which a lot of times they're not, then you're okay. It's the vast middle ground that is really and honestly become a national security issue in terms of their lack of fitness. Right? You guys agree?
Yeah. Well, to go back to your other point, I would say a big problem is the class size. A lot of times you have half a gym. They have the divider up, and you've got 80, 90 kids there. So how much can you devote to individual instruction? Interesting point. One time I was fortunate enough to have a group of, and I think this goes towards our discussion too, is motivation, motivated students. They were good students, not just in the classroom, but in phys ed. So, and they kept all these students together because they were like an honors group. And there, I just had those kids by myself, and it was great. It was almost like a period off. It was so enjoyable. We actually did go over things like a zone defense in basketball and so forth, and the reasons behind it, and so forth and so on. So there was an ability to actually instruct. Now, once you increase that number by 3 and only add one
3
more
times,
teacher,
you mean 3 times?
yes.
Yeah.
So now instead of 30, you've got 90. And again, in that 90 are all different types of personalities. So
it's a lot to manage.
Yes. Yeah. So it gets back to Don's point of just make sure nobody gets killed or hurt seriously.
They don't get into fights and all of that, which is inevitable with teenagers and so on different levels. Actually, to a certain extent, that would be decent physical activity too, which at least they're doing something, right? They're wrestling with each other.
Growing up in the 80s, we still had the presidential fitness test. That was definitely still a thing. I think they retired that in 2012, but you were kind of expected to play sports, and that was almost part of the social,
framework.
Framework. Like, oh, you're going to play basketball, you're going to play lacrosse, tennis, football, baseball, etc.
Isn't that incredible? Because I will tell you something, where I live right now in Colorado, it was so sad. There was a family next to me, neighbors, that had a kid who was, by the time he was a senior in high school, was 6'1", and his mother was a collegiate athlete, and they worked so hard on practicing. He wasn't very aggressive, but they worked so hard on all fundamental aspects of basketball. And you know what? They didn't have the school he was in, and I will name the school because it was a very big public government school in the Southwest Denver area. They didn't have sufficient funds to have a JV basketball team. And so therefore he couldn't play. And so he went on to just work in the local grocery store instead. And I just found that so sad because he had done so much work, and he really was more than sufficient. And in terms of any reasonable assessment on a secondary or school level to be able to, play in a sport which he wanted to. I mean, we all reach our levels of incompetence, meaning that we reach a level and we have to stop. And sometimes, for Albert Pujols, there is no level in which he had to stop except his final age, whatever that was. But most of us reach a level at some point in our teens or our 20s in which we can't go any further. But let me focus on that subject for a moment, Ron, because this is something that I know you and I have talked about, and it's becoming worse and worse. There's really a gap that exists, and it's widening tremendously, of two groups of students, meaning anybody under 18 years old, in terms of physical education. One group who is getting nothing. It's that group in which you have the physical education teacher with 90 kids in a class and simply throwing out a basketball. And the other group is kids that are being trained to be a specific professional athlete on some level and being either pushed too hard or they really are capable of reaching, that professional level. And obviously that's a much smaller group, but there really is total bifurcation in that regard. Do you agree? And how awful is that?
It's very alarming. Again, I think it goes back to something Steve said before, like the era we grew up in. You got basically thrown out of the house, or it was something you didn't have all these computer games and so forth. So sports was you watched this stuff on TV, and then you tried to emulate things in the sandlot or schoolyard, whatever you want to call it. And it was a way to have just simple things like having relay races around the block. I mean, physical activity was a way to entertain yourself.
Now the insurance companies tell you can't do it. Yeah, right.
Yeah, and now kids don't. And now kids have so many other options. Of course, they're going to rather sit on the couch and play a video game,
at least at the
than
moment.
go run around the block.
One other thing I'll mention, and you could probably relate to this because you're older, both of you. I'm a little bit younger, but even when I was growing up in the 80s,
He's calling us old men there, Ron, but
No,
okay, we'll give him that one.
You've already self-identified as boomers, but I'm just saying, when I grew up in the 80s, like you kind of organized there's quite a bit of that. There were organized sports, but you weren't looking to adults to make your fun. To set up every activity for you. You'd go out and do a flag football game.
This is where the insurance companies come in.
Exactly.
The insurance companies, at least when I was growing up, they had nothing to do with us,
Nope.
going and playing in a field or doing
now they
this
tell
or
you
that.
You can't do anything. I mean, that's what the lawyers exist for, right? To tell you what you can't do. And
Yes.
until all of the organizations that try to just set up environments for kids to participate in an organized fashion, that they can't do anything because they'll be held liable if some kid stubs a toe at some point.
Really?
And yeah.
Even if it's just like, say there are lots of parks in New Jersey. Say, I go to a park and there are a bunch of kids playing football. Like that would be an issue. Like not an organized.
It absolutely would be. The park and whoever owns the park would be held liable for not stopping you from playing football and breaking your arm because you fell. I mean, I don't mean to be Tucker level
that's interesting.
Antagonistic hyperbole, but it's totally true. Am I wrong, Ron?
No, you're 100% correct. Yeah.
That's so foreign from, I can think of specific instances growing up. We used to rollerblade and jump on top of things or down staircases. And once in a while, people would tell us to leave or get out because they didn't want us jumping on something. But it wasn't because there was a grave concern about us getting hurt. We did get hurt, not badly.
All time. That's how you learn. What were you going to say, Ron?
Yeah, Steve, that's a great point because today we have, you have to go join a gym, or as Don was saying, you need special coaches, instructors. Kids back in the day, so to use that term, like your neighborhood was a gym.
Yeah, you self-organized.
Like here's a little creek. Who could jump across the creek without getting their feet wet? Simple competitions like that. Again, challenging yourself or trying to figure out in your own mind how to do this. Do I, next time I'll take off closer to where the creek is, so I make sure I make it to the other side, and that's all part of learning. It's part of a mental
So-
process.
I remember learning to do a flip off the diving board, and
Yeah.
asking the lifeguard, and the great advice he gave me was, don't think about it, just do it. He's getting sick of me
And then
standing
if
on
you-
it.
Don's point on the liabilities, that's why you've seen gymnastics disappear from high schools. When I was in school, we had the whole gym would be set up. You had stations, high bar, the horse,
We had that in
balance
elementary
beam.
school.
Okay, good for you.
Yeah, no,
It's in
it
the
was
80s.
cool.
I
I don't know
almost-
where they
Yeah.
got that equipment, but
Yeah.
and one time I did get a bloody nose, going off the vault, but we loved
I think you'd
it.
still have a retroactive suit at this point, Steve.
Oh,
It's only
yes.
30 years ago. You probably could, look at a couple of million, half of which would go to the law firm that would pick you up.
Those are
then you
good
have to pay
memories,
taxes
Don.
and the rest of it, unless it was punitive. All of those things.
Yeah,
We thought it was awesome.
I think administrators got to the point where, look, just be very careful what you do in there. We don't want any lawsuits.
That's the answer.
I don't want to
And
get
let
sued.
me ask you this. Let me change this discussion. Is that a national security issue?
I would say yes. Huh?
Because how many of our youth from 18 down, the audience of the Don Sullivan Show, is able to qualify, say, under 1950 standards to actually join a 1950s U.S. Army?
I think being generous, maybe 25%.
Well, Ron has a lot of, and I'm not going to ask you to specify any names or even the exact place, but Ron has been very successful in placing his athletes at different times in military academies. And so you have a lot of insight in how the military academies have, shall I say, adjusted their fitness standards over the years to meet with the capabilities of even those very, very high-end audiences. What about that? High-end groups, I shouldn't say audiences. They're not listening. Maybe they are.
I love that question, how you got around the, we're avoiding saying lowering standards.
I was going to ask about that.
This is not a political show at all.
Yeah, so someone who we're both a mutual friend of graduated from the Academy, West Point, 97. The males had to do a 2-mile run. It was a 3-day, as a day they had 3 tests. How many push-ups in 2 minutes, how many sit-ups in 2 minutes, and a 2-mile run. And they had to do it in 11 minutes. And now that's up to 13 minutes at West Point.
I mean, the difference is enormous.
That's
and
2 minutes, yeah.
And when we understand there are certain body types that running an 11-minute 2-mile, it's not possible. Your average offensive lineman making $10 million a year in the NFL is not going to run an 11-minute 2-mile.
No.
But that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about the general population being very incapable as compared to, heck, the 90s, not the 1950s when the U.S. military defeated the real bad guys in the world.
It's the thought that maybe we're just going to fight wars with drones and robots moving forward, and they can just sit there.
That's a big part of it. Yeah.
Yeah. I just wonder. You need people on the ground, though.
But again, that's the whole structure is broken down. Like I still work part-time security, and my manager is ex police officer. He knows somebody that's in the guard, like a colonel, and they had training exercises outdoors in the rain. And there was a guy that was allowed to stand there with an umbrella because he didn't want to get wet. And so my manager says, my natural inclination was to say, and you allow that? And he goes, I have to.
Oh, man. I remember some practices, football, lacrosse in the rain. And you always kind of felt, it wasn't always, it was usually fun, and you felt kind of, a little badass, playing in the rain, those kind of muddy, ugly games, there's a little bit more to it.
I want to bring up something a little bit more personal, Ron. And one of the things that you and I did, and this came from you before I joined you, and certainly you perpetuated it after, that we had a ethic, and you have taught me this, that it was absolutely important that every participant on a sports team, and the track and field teams, you could have as many kids as you wanted. And we had JV teams, and we had 100 times. But it was absolutely imperative that every single one of them reach that level of incompetence. That sounds derisive, but it's not meant to be. Reach the level that they could accomplish. We had a very interesting little club over a period of that 10 years, that decade, which was called the 5-Minute Mile Club. And a 5-minute mile for a high school kid is pretty good, but it's not great. We had probably 50 different kids over a span of 7 years join that club. And we spent a lot of time with folks now who are in their 50s, who are, say the least, can barely stand up and walk around, but they have the memory that they actually ran a sub 5-minute mile. Kids that were 5'6" and would dumpy even in high school, that they actually were able to run a 5-minute. Why was that so important to them, do you think? Why was that so important that we did that?
Well, every kid deserves recognition. I mean, there's no sense being a teacher or a coach if you're not at that level, if you're not going to inspire, motivate,
Every one of them.
help build kids' self-esteem.
We had kids.
That was always a main objective of our program.
And you kind of apply that to other things in life too. It doesn't have to just stay with
that's it, Stephen.
Yeah.
We had a couple of kids, again, not to be named, that literally had Olympic level ability. And we had other kids that had no business whatsoever trying to be in some kind of organized sport. Yet what was so important is every one of them reaching whatever their ultimate capability was, because as Stephen just stated, they would remember and they would learn from that they could
help
push
them
themselves,
become the best at being them.
And whatever, that's right, the best they can be. And they did that, and that's something they could carry forward for their whole lives. And that's something Don, that I always found so important. But
not to interrupt, but you used to have a great saying where, of course, we had distance runners, we had sprinters, we had field event people, and I remember you at a meeting one time saying, you should watch and support these other people. You don't really have to completely understand what they're doing, but you have to respect it. You should respect it. And that, I think, fits in along with what we're saying right now. And that's really how you build a team.
Yeah, the sportsmanship kind of aspect of it and camaraderie.
Yes.
Well, you learn about yourself, and you learn about how far you can go. You learn about how to endure discomfort and how to I've always thought that there is no attribute any athlete on any level could have better than the ability to come back from some kind of a defeat, whether or not it's a loss in the 7th game of the World Series, or it's just simply a pitch you threw that you thought was a strike and it was a ball. To be able to come back to that next moment, to be able to stand up after you've been knocked down, and you do not learn that absent doing it yourself.
That's a great point, and that's why we love those comeback stories. As far as movies,
But this is for everybody, not just somebody in an organized sport. It's something that everyone has to learn, and we don't do it anymore. Let me ask you this, Ron, and this, I know the answer to this, and I'm afraid to ask it, but do you think it's getting worse or better right now?
From what I see, and I'm going by my niece having a senior in high school, I think it's getting worse.
Why? Why do you think it's getting worse? Other than, obviously
the problems we've talked about just keep, there's less people going into the profession, less teachers, again, it's just something that's got to be done. It's like
so what should they be taught?
Required activity.
What should the physical education instructors, hopefully in graduate schools, be taught to fix this problem? What should the next generation of the cliche of gym teachers know that you know?
Well, I would go above that and say, how important is it to the administration of the school to run a quality physical education program and not just use it as a big room to put 4 sections of kids to clear up classrooms for other
So let me
subjects.
finish then with this perfect segue of this last question, and then I'm going to let Steve jump in for this, because that was a perfect segue when you said administration. If you were advising future Health and Human Services Secretary Bobby Kennedy Jr. on, he's obviously very busy. He's going to rebuild the entire food system in the United States. He's going to take on and hopefully eviscerate much of Big Pharma. But this is the fitness, and this is something he's very sensitive to. You can see how fit he is right now as an individual. If you were advising him, which you should be, if you were advising him as to what steps to take from a perspective of the infrastructure of the United States systemically, what would you advise him?
Are you referring to like setting up a curriculum or?
Anything you want to say. What would you say, Bobby Kennedy Jr., now that you're in charge, now that MAHA is a reality? What would you suggest that he focus on first in terms of helping America's youth become physically fit again, aside from just reinstituting the Presidential Fitness Award?
I would say, again, we go back to class size and the groupings, heterogeneous or homogeneous.
Meaning what? What's
meaning
that
that
distinction in that case?
heterogeneous, you'd have maybe potential Olympic athletes in there with a student who, can't run 40 yards. So now the theory behind that is, okay, the better athletes are going to help the
but that
not
gap
so
is
good
huge.
athletes, like they're going to be like assistant coaches or teachers. But in reality, that doesn't work out too well. Usually
Gap has to be closer.
Yeah, they just make fun out of the kids who can't. So now if you get a group of kids, like I mentioned, that group I had before, which just happened to be based on academic achievement. But now if you could somehow, after a year or so, say for sophomore, junior, senior year, identify kids like you would in any other subject, who's really competent. And now you could actually give real instruction to kids. Like, what's the sense of going out and saying, okay, we're going to play softball today. And some poor kid comes up there and is standing literally facing the pitcher. Like with their both shoulders facing, instead of being turned sideways, as we'll put it, to use rotation to hit the ball. They just simple things like that, a simple batting stance, how to hold a bat. So now that's again back to the other in the beginning. How do you deal with, you got 30 of those kids and you got 30 kids that play 3 sports a year and been playing since 7th grade. Those kids somehow have to, they need special attention. Their curriculum has to be geared differently.
And it's important because it's important for every one of them.
Yes,
to get to their level of competence.
Exactly.
So it's a cultural thing as well, where there are, growing up, there were some families that were really into sports and physical fitness, and, dad's out with you or, with them, showing them how to do this, how to do that. There's a basketball, net, et cetera, and, are there, is it starting at home, I guess, is the question.
It does, but it can be overcome. And this is partly what, and correct me if I'm wrong, Ron, you think I'm putting too much onus on the education system, but this is something that is a primary facet of education when we call it physical education. That's why I started this discussion off with the point of physical education and not gym class as if it's just recreation.
Yes.
And this is something between the actual organized sports and the high-level sports. And it should be a primary focus of education for every youth, meaning anybody 18 years old or under in high school in America, because it is a national security issue.
Yes.
You guys think that? I do.
I do. Yeah.
Yeah, I would have concerns about that. I also think it's probably linked to the fact that we see more mental health issues with children nowadays than
How
ever
about
before.
that? And
Yeah,
not to, we're all male here, especially since now that we have really focused again on male and female. The we're male and we seem to be talking mostly about boys, and we're not at all. Ron and I were at the forefront, particularly with certain young athletes that we had back in the '80s, of really bringing young girls into the fold of all of these different sports. We are huge proponents of Title IX as it was originally written, and Ron and I both coached. And I'm much Ron many more than me, but very successful female girl athletes at young ages, and Ron, you had them in your phys ed classes as well, right? So the
Yes.
same applies. The exact same point applies, and it should. And that's certainly something that the World War II generation didn't understand, but we understand that now. So you know what? I think we need to wrap this one up. This is a special episode here, Steve, and send it off to the White House.
Can I get to ask one question?
Yeah, please go.
of both of you guys, you can take turns. I think a good way to end this would be, so you people were not physical educators, but now what are a couple objectives or results you would want to see from a quality phys ed program over 4 years in high school? And I'll kind of start it out by saying, Steve, do you go to a gym or do you lift or?
I jog sometimes. I've got a Bowflex in the house. I don't go to a gym. I used to go to the YMCA down the road, but fell off that. But I have different activities I use for, to get physical, do a little cardio, this and that, try and stay in shape.
I know Don lifts, but I'm just thinking, like, a lot of these things, people go to gyms, they pay this money, personal trainers, right?
Yeah. It's a
to
$1 billion
me,
business.
So it's kind of a lead into my question to you guys. That's one thing I would want to see is you should be able to come out after 4 years of a good phys ed program in high school and join a local gym if you need a facility, or if you have equipment in your house, but you should know how to set up your own weightlifting program. It's not a thing of you see these young kids and I'm just going to throw a lot of weight on the bar and try and impress everybody
Oh, yeah.
on how much
no good.
and they wind up hurting themselves.
Yeah, they injure themselves.
So there's a systematic way to do that. And these are the things that should be taught. Or how do you start out with a running program, a jogging program, things like target heart rate, and all that. So I think I've said enough. So I'll let you guys answer.
You're the expert here, and you are a true great mind in this area. And it's unfortunate that people like you, and aren't that many, are not tapped into enough. Which is why I said we're going to wrap this one up and send it to the White House. And as long as it gets past Elon Musk, we know that Bobby will get it and take it seriously. But I will say, to answer your question, Ron, directly, I would want to see every kid graduate from high school with an understanding and a confidence in their own physical presence, so that they can take that forward in every aspect of their future lives. They're not going to be professional athletes. They're not going to be college athletes. They might not even be serious high school athletes, but they need to be confident in their own bodies, and they're not. And I see that day in and day out. I see so often, and this is one particular example, so many friends that I have that have an injury, and then they go to physical therapy, or they don't, and they expect that injury to be fixed inside of a week, or they expect to be able to lose 20 pounds in a week of sitting on a bicycle. They don't understand, or sitting on a stationary bicycle, they don't understand what it takes to get themselves, especially as they get older, into some kind of condition. They don't understand what it takes to recover from an injury. And that all starts in the secondary school level, maybe in the primary school level, but definitely in the secondary school level, meaning high school. And that's what I want to see. That's what I would want to see. So let's wrap this up. Yeah, Steve, go ahead.
I used to love dodgeball. I say,
That's not
bring
even
back
legal,
the
is it?
presidential.
Which is now illegal.
Yeah, which is probably illegal now, but we
I think they
loved
took
it.
down
Bring
Will
back
Ferrell's movie.
dodgeball and bring back. It was Vince Vaughn and Ben Stiller, but bring back dodgeball and bring back the presidential fitness test. I say.
Yeah,
it doesn't have to be like a the jocks are taking over type of thing, but
it shouldn't be. It shouldn't be.
It just basic requirements and encouragement and instruction in these areas, because the obesity rate's too high, and there's too much mental illness too.
They don't know how to fix themselves. Americans don't. That's the biggest problem. I think that the single biggest problem in America is that lack of confidence. That's why I answered your question the way I did, Ron. That's what I believe.
Well, they'd rather, there are people that would rather have them spend a lot of money on medications and pills
that
versus
is a
take care of
perfect subject
themselves.
for a future episode of the Don Sullivan Show, and I guarantee you it will be. And speaking of future episodes, Coach Sparagoski, we're going to have you back on to talk about some of the greater nuances of different sports. For example, I'm going to have an entire series on why so many kids who are pitchers need to have their elbows reconstructed. We're going to talk about jumpers and the mechanics of jumping and why that's so important. We're also going to talk about one of our favorite subjects that we have had for about 40 years, why it's so important for various different high school athletes from a health and longevity perspective to participate, cross-train in multiple sports, as opposed to focus at 16 years old on one particular sport or another. So we're going to have all these subjects as the focuses of our conversation, and you're going to be on with us as long as you're willing to. And thank you, Steve. Thank you, Coach Sparagoski. And
thank you, guys.
I'm going to end this show now. Everybody, stay smart, stay curious, continue to think about science, technology, and computing, and we would love to see you on the next version of the Don Sullivan Show.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, folks. See you soon.